This is the type of project that I've been wanting to make for a while, which is to make a piece of furniture in some impressive architectural style. And it is best to start with something simple, so a nightstand seems like a good start. Like with any other woodworking project, the wood preparation is the first step. So my brother made all of the wooden boards and planks necessary for this build, all of them cut, glued and sanded, so that I could get right into cutting out shapes with the CNC. This nightstand is supposed to be like a building. There will be a lower, middle and roof area, and the middle floor being something like a hall. But since it is a piece of furniture, it should also be useful, so I cannot put anything on the flat shelf part, and that means I am able to decorate only the walls and ceilings, but still that's plenty to work with. This nightstand is inspired by Gothic architecture, from which I took some ideas, but what was my main inspiration for this project was the architecture from World of Warcraft Shadowlands, specifically the Revendreth zone, which has this vampiric fantasy Gothic style, and I really like the buildings and color palette of this zone. Now I'm making the windows for the middle floor, and I'm using epoxy resin with 3 types of red pigment to achieve somewhat similar color to those that can be seen in Revendreth. This ornament is made up of random lines and shapes that I created and tried to make it look like a mix of fantasy and Gothic. Pouring epoxy resin is always mesmerizing to watch, especially when it's some cool color like this blood red, and also how it's liquid and then cures into solid shape. And all of that is nice, but what I really don't like about epoxy resin is that it can get incredibly messy, and other things, such as its toxicity. For a long time, windows have been a necessary addition to almost every type of building, and the cool thing about them is that you can see through them, which I cannot say about these windows. Not that I wanted them to be clear, at least they still let light come through. The main objective with these windows was to have similar color to the in-game windows, and as you can see, their windows have a very nice and detailed design. I did consider for a minute making these window frames more detailed, but I'm glad I didn't, because they are made from very thin piece of wood and are very fragile, and I managed to break a couple of them during CNC cutting and sanding, so I'm glad I spared myself from more trouble. Now it's time to glue together the base of this nightstand, and right now it could already be a complete nightstand, but for this project it is just a starting point. I had to keep in mind that I should keep it moderate and not over-design it, which wasn't as simple because the Gothic architecture is full of intricate details. Especially the late Gothic period, where they went all in with the decorations, but what I was looking for was their main elements like pointed arch, colored window glass and various shapes being extruded in and out of the walls. And that's what I'm making right now, bunch of design elements that will be added to the base structure. Gluing these parts wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, because the boards got a little bit warped in some places, and there wasn't as much space to properly clamp these parts, but at least they are not required to be strong, since they are just the decorations. These are columns that will be glued to the previously glued parts, and I think they look a little bit more fantasy than Gothic. I wanted them to have some interesting shapes, but still look pretty simple. Originally, these were supposed to be cylindrical, made from thick wooden pins, cut in half and glued to the wall, but this way I was able to use the leftover wood and let the CNC do it for me. When you think of Gothic architecture, the first building that might come to mind is a cathedral and church, and that is understandable because this style is associated with a sense of divine and transcendence. And I didn't even know that well that there were other buildings in this style, such as town halls, castles and even houses. The Gothic architecture is also popular in video games, such as in Dark Souls with Anor Londo, Lothric Castle and Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, Bloodborne's Yharnam City, which is Victorian Gothic, Diablo games with some of their zones using this style, and many other games using this style to a different extent. And I understand that this style is very popular in games, not only because it just looks cool, with all the detailed and ornamented huge buildings, which allows to tell a story with simply using visuals, but it just has that inspiring but also mysterious atmosphere. I also want to mention Warhammer 40k, which is a whole fictional universe, with video games, tabletop game minis and video series. And this was also my inspiration, this time more thematically, rather than actual features of buildings, specifically the architecture of the Imperium, having a mix of sci-fi and Gothic. At this stage, the build is nearing completion, and at this point I'm gluing these decorational pieces. There are 18 of them on this nightstand. It's a pretty simple shape that adds a lot to the final design of this piece. One of the design elements in Gothic architecture are their pointy and spiky towers and pinnacles, which originally I wanted to put on top corners of this roof. But when you have a nightstand next to your bed, you probably don't want anything with spikes to be there, because that would just be an accident waiting to happen. After very long and tedious sanding, it is time to finally finish this with applying oil. I am using Rubio Monocoat with charcoal pigment, because I want this to have a dark color to go well with the red windows. Great thing about this oil is that you just have to use one coat, hence the name. I thought that I could get this whole nightstand covered in one day, but in reality it took me multiple days to apply finish to this, mainly because of the hard to reach spots, and the oil wasn't that easy to spread, but that was probably because I haven't been using it for some time. But through all that, I finally managed to complete this, although it once again took me longer than I originally anticipated. But with all of that out of the way, let's see how this unusual nightstand looks completed.